So I want to thank you. It's great to see Bernie here and Steve and all your leadership. And I saw Ray Waldron out there. Every time I see Ray, I always think, keep your speech short. You know, that's his big thing. When I was running, I'd be out there running for county attorney, and Ray would be sitting out there in St. Anthony in his precinct going, short. So it's fun to be here. So I just had a pretty funny experience. I was at something, and they were talking, women police officers, they were talking about a Minnesota accent, and someone actually said, well, you know what? Your accent sounds a little bit like Sarah Palin, okay? I'm not kidding. So I told them, well, you know what? And I tell you now, there's one big difference between me and Sarah Palin. If she was here speaking, you'd have to pay her hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I'm here for a free AFL-CIO t-shirt, okay? Okay. So I have one more funny Sarah Palin joke. You know, when I got to Washington, I got assigned to the Commerce Committee, which was good. I can actually work on some of your issues with airlines and different things. And so I get assigned to this Commerce Committee, but somehow Harry Reid puts me on the Ocean Subcommittee, okay? Like I'm from Minnesota, right? I'm from Minnesota. I said at some kind of press event, I said Rahm Emanuel was sitting there. I said, it's like being from Chicago and being placed on the Ethics Subcommittee. No. Okay, well, there's no one from Illinois here. All right, so anyway, so for years I couldn't figure out why I got on this committee. And I was sitting next to Frank Lautenberg on my first meeting. I look around, I see Olympia Snowe and Trent Lott, John Kerry, and I write a note to Lautenberg. I say, I'm the only senator on this subcommittee that doesn't have an ocean. And he writes back, no problem, next year just come back and ask for one. But the truth was, I finally realized why I got placed on that subcommittee. That's because I can see Lake Superior from my porch. Okay. So, we have a lot of work ahead, and I know you heard from our great candidates yesterday. It was an honor to be here with Larry and Tony and the good work that they're doing. I just left an event with Margaret, who's over at the Capitol and working on the flood issues in southern Minnesota, and we have such amazing leadership over there, and I want you to remember that every day, because that doesn't happen in every single state, and you know they go to battle for you all the time. And that's why this governor's race is so incredibly important. But before I get to that, I wanted to talk a little bit about some things that's happened in Washington that I think are good, because a lot of times when you turn on the news, you hear only this fighting, this fighting, this fighting. Well, we have done a number of things that have just been the beginning, the start, to address the issues of working families. First of all, finally, we put someone in charge of the Department of Labor who cares about labor, Hilda Solis. The president got Craig Becker on the National Labor Relations Board. And when he found out it couldn't happen one way, he did it another way, got it done. We put Linda Puchala on the National Mediation Board, and we finally, thank you, she is a fan, we finally helped change the rules for how votes are counted in elections to form unions, a major victory for our airline and railroad workers. That was a change that I actively supported. And just last week, I joined my colleagues to defeat a resolution that would have changed that. We passed the Recovery Act that has helped save millions of jobs and provides some stability in this time of great economic turmoil. As you know, $3.5 billion went to Minnesota for transportation infrastructure and energy projects. We passed Wall Street reform to ensure that risky bets made on Wall Street are never again threaten the prosperity of our workers on Main Street. And for the women workers out there, the first bill that President Obama signed into law was the Lilly Ledbetter bill that changed that unfair 2007 Supreme Court ruling that would have allowed for discrimination in the workplace. So we've worked to level the playing field. But one of the things that I thought really highlighted the difference between the parties was when we had the vote about extending unemployment a few months back. I mean, you all know that wasn't the workers that charged this economic crisis. They're the ones that didn't start this. It was a bunch of bankers on Wall Street that were getting involved in deals they didn't understand and taking risky bets and doing things for some short-term profit. And so then here we have now this crisis rolls over the whole country, and it's the workers who are suffering. And yet they were holding up the extension of unemployment and COBRA benefits. Still remember this, there's a guy named Jim Bunning from Kentucky, and he was being hounded because he was holding it up. And he literally turned around on the elevator and gave the finger to the reporters. I said that day, he didn't just give the finger to the reporters, he gave the finger to every working person in America. But we, with your help, brought him down, and we got that extension passed. Now, I'd love just to give a rabble-rousing speech here about how great things are, but we know that there is so much more work to be done. I don't care what report says that we're coming out of this recession. We're not out of it yet. But there's a few things when you go out and talk to people during this election that I want you to remind them of, especially when you're helping people like Tim Walz and Colin and Jim Oberstar. I want you to remember this. You think back to how things were in January of 2009. That month, we lost more jobs in this country than there are people in the state of Vermont. And I remember trying to find good news in groups that I met with. I met with AFL-CIO members. I'd meet with teachers. I'd meet with nurses. Everyone, realtors, everyone had bad news. And I will tell you, back then, I started to keep track of who had good news. Okay, spam, all right? Spam does well in an economic downturn. I don't know if you knew that. Digital TVs were selling. Makeup does well during a downturn. True story, you wouldn't imagine that. Low-end beer. Low-end beer was doing great. There we go. So finally, I have this group of doctors come in and they go, you know what, things are so bad, people are postponing elective surgeries, it's just a disaster. And I said, were there any surgeries where there's been an increase? Is there anything? They go, well, actually, Senator, yes, there's one. I said, what's that? They said, well, we've seen a skyrocketing number of vasectomies. It's a true story. So the next day, I look in the paper, and there's this thing about how there's increase in vasectomies. 2 weeks later, I go to that White House Correspondents' Dinner, this fancy thing. I'm sitting there, and who do I run into but Warren Buffett, okay? So I go up to him, and I go, Mr. Buffett, things are so bad. I'd like to see what you think needs to be done here. And I said, but there's only a few areas where I've seen any glimmer of hope. And I said, that's low-end beer and makeup and movies and digital TVs and spam, and then the weirdest thing, vasectomies. And he looks at me, true story, and he says, Senator, that's a very interesting economic trend analysis. I go, well, thank you, Mr. Buffett. And he says, but the only problem is the end. And I go, what's wrong with the end? True story. He goes, you can only have one vasectomy. Okay. Now, laughing aside, it's been a very tough time. And you guys have hung in there with us through the worst of it. And I don't think anyone has felt the impact of this more than the working people of this country. So this leads me to my next point that I think is really key at a time when people are feeling really cynical about Washington and what's happening. We need to make sure that we don't go the wrong way on this election. We are at a crossroads in our state, right? I've always loved representing Minnesota because it's a state that treats our workers fairly. It's a state that believes in education and in teaching and in doing better. It's a reason that we do so well. It's a reason companies want to locate here. It's the reason that we do better and better and better than the rest of the country. It's because of that belief in education and that belief in fairness and equality and treating people with dignity. That's what's made our state great. So here we are at the crossroads. And I know people, supported different people for governor, but right now we've got a candidate who's going to win, but only with your help, and that's Mark Dayton. Let me tell you about Mark. Mark knows Minnesota workers. He knows Minnesota workers from when he served as Rudy Perpich's Commissioner of Economic Development. He knows how to protect the pocketbooks of working families, and he knows that from when he was state auditor. And he knows how to protect seniors. Now, when you talk to people about Mark and why that's important, I can tell you more than anything I know that, because when I got elected to the Senate, all these people would come up to me and say, hey, are you going to continue Mark Dayton's bus trips that he pays for up to Canada? Are you going to do that? I'm like, well, I can't really afford a bus. I can't do that. But man, the seniors understand that he stood up for them on prescription drugs to say we should be able to re-import drugs from Canada, that we should be able to have negotiation for prices on prescription drugs. And you know what else Mark Dayton knows? Mark Dayton knows the waitresses don't make $100,000. Now, we have got a tremendous pro-labor delegation that represents Minnesota from the House of Representatives. We've got Al, of course, in the Senate, who I know you heard from yesterday. We've got Jim Oberstar. We've got Colin Peterson, Tim Walz, Betty McCollum, Keith Ellison. They have all been there during some very critical votes. So we need to make sure that they get reelected. And why don't we just add in, it would be really great to elect Terrell Clark. So why don't you give her a help? And you think about what Mark Ritchie did. I cannot tell you, when I go around the country, people talk about that, our recount. You know, I always like to joke that I'm from the state of Minnesota, where in the words of Garrison Keillor, the women are strong, the men are good looking, and all the recounts are above average. Well, it was Mark Ritchie that made history by overseeing that recount in the fair way. People respect him all over the country. We need to reelect him. Lori Swanson, taking on the credit card companies. Her name comes up all the time in Washington because people know the work that she's done. And Rebecca Otto, whose work on behalf of the Minnesota taxpayer earned her the National Excellence and Accountability Award from the National State Auditors Association. We have a great team, and they're going to need your help. Now, what are we up against in this election? Look at that money that's being spent. I heard Bob Menendez, the head of the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, told me that after the recess in August, we were outspent 8-1 from independent expenditures because of that Citizens United case. We know what? The people of this country know something the Supreme Court didn't know, and that is this: corporations aren't people, people are people. That's what this election is about. So no matter how much money gets spent in those elections, we have to remember that. We need leaders who understand the importance of investing in the future. We Minnesotans know what this is about. I live 6 blocks from that I-35W bridge. And as I said that day, a bridge just shouldn't fall down in the middle of America. But you know when it does fall down, what do? We rebuild that bridge. And when I look at the importance of Jim's transportation work, we need to pass the transportation reauthorization bill and invest in transportation infrastructure in this country. Now, there's something else we need to do in this country, and I actually chair, now that I got off that ocean subcommittee, I chair the subcommittee on innovation and competitiveness. And I believe, and I truly believe this in my core, I told the president this, 5 of us had lunch with him, senators had lunch with him a few weeks ago, Sherrod Brown and some other people. And I said to him, you know, we need to be a country again that makes things again, right? That thinks again, that exports to the world. We need to be a country where you go into any store and you turn something over and it says in big letters, made in the United States of America. That is how we're going to get out of this economic downturn. And I want to see that message coming out again and again and again in this country, that is how you move forward. Someone called it nation building in our own nation. Well, I think that's where we need to go because, you know what, I always look back and I think about those Beijing Olympics a few years ago. And I don't know if you watched them. I watched them with my family on this kind of fuzzy TV up in Two Harbors. And I remember seeing, I thought, is that really? It was 2,000 drummers perfectly synchronized, right? And I watched that. I thought, man, we're in trouble if we don't get our act together here. And those drum beats have been getting louder and louder. And that's why we need leaders in Washington and leaders in the state that understand that if China's going to build 2 million solar panels, that we're going to build even more. And that if India is going to start putting all kinds of incentives in place for manufacturing, that we're going to do the same thing. That we need to put this country first as we're competing on a global economic stage, and that, yeah, we need trade, but it needs to be fair trade as we move forward. Now, I'm going to end with this. I think you all know I'm the granddaughter of an iron ore miner, and I'm a daughter of a newspaper man. And they were both proud of workers and proud of that. My dad was in the newspaper guild his whole life. And one thing you might not have known is that I'm also the daughter of a teacher. And my mom passed away about 6 weeks ago. And I thought about this a lot because people would come up to me everywhere and tell me stories. Kids she'd had in class. She taught second grade until she was 70 years old. She had 30 second graders in her class. And these kids would come up, and they're now grown up, and these other teachers, and they'd tell me stories. Like, I always knew that when she taught the monarch butterfly unit, that she'd dress up as a monarch butterfly, and she would have this sign that said, "To Mexico or bust." But what I didn't know is she would then go to Cub Foods wearing the monarch butterfly outfit and go grocery shopping. She took over the elementary boys wrestling team because no one else would do it. And I thought about, as I was mourning her loss, I thought about how she lives on. How she lives on and how so many workers live on, whether it's nurses that live on in the spirit of those little babies that they say that maybe those babies are never going to know who they are. Or those people that cross over that new 35W bridge every day, they may not know the workers that worked on that bridge. They may not know the people that have done things, the cops and other people that have saved their lives. They may not know those electricians that did it right safely and wired their homes so that they could be safe with their family. But what I thought about my mom is that she lives on. She lives on, and all those songs to those kids she taught, all those rhymes that she taught, she lives on, and all those hands that she held. And that's what the American worker is all about. So I just want to thank Cher for her leadership. I want to thank you. I want to gear you up for this election. This is going to be a key election, so get out there, work.